Hello, my friends. Friends I've never met. They called my son many things. A prophet, a rebel, a savior. Some even called him a king. But to me, before all of that, he was simply Jeshua, my boy, the tiny, precious child I held in my arms on a cold winter's night, surrounded by the gentle breathing of animals and the smell of hay in a rundown stable. The world knows his story, or at least the version it has chosen to tell. It's a story told in grand pronouncements, in heavy books and solemn sermons. But in their telling, they missed the heart of it. They missed the most important part, the quietest part, the part that makes us human. They don't know the secret my husband, the good, kind carpenter Kaelan, took with him to his grave, a promise whispered in the dark. And most of all, they never understood the real reason, the heartbreaking, soul-shattering reason behind the kiss that killed my son. For years, I have held my silence, but silence doesn't heal. It only allows the truth to fade. So today, I'm going to tell you the real story, our story, a story of love, of sacrifice, and of a truth that has been buried for decades under the dust of history. This is not the story you've heard, and I promise you its ending will change the way you see everything. Before I begin, I just want to know where this story is finding you. If you would, leave me a comment below. Tell me where you are in this wide world and what time it is in your corner of it. It's a small miracle, isn't it, that even across thousands of miles for this one moment, we are all here together, sharing the same story. All right, come back in time with me. Our story doesn't begin with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. Our land, Judea, was straining under the iron heel of the Roman Empire. The very air was thick with the scent of metal, sweat, and a nameless dread. In every marketplace, in every alley, you could feel the unseen eyes of spies, and every loud word could be your last. The architect of this terror was Governor Valerius, a paranoid and brutal man. He didn't just rule with laws, he ruled with an obsession. He was haunted by the ancient prophecies, the whispers of a new king who would rise from among the people and shatter the yoke of Roman rule. The slightest rumor, the smallest sign, was enough to unleash his murderous wrath. In the midst of this suffocating world, I was just Elara, a young woman from the village of Nazareth, and I was carrying a secret that was at once sacred and mortally dangerous. I was betrothed to Kaelan, the kindest carpenter I had ever known. His hands were rough with calluses from his tools, but his eyes were warmer than the morning sun. And then I found myself with child, and the baby was not his. I remember the night I told him as if it were yesterday. We sat under the old olive tree behind our homes, the silver moonlight painting his face in shifting patterns of light and shadow. I had braced myself for the worst, for his rage, his scorn, his rejection. An unwed mother in those days was worse than a criminal. I closed my eyes, waiting for the storm to break, but Kaelan was only silent, a silence that stretched for a century. When I finally dared to open my eyes, I saw he was weeping, not tears of anger, but the silent, wrenching tears of a broken heart. He loved me, I knew he did, and that love was tearing him apart. He was a righteous man, a man of the law, and the law gave him every right to denounce me, to have me cast out and stoned. Neither of us slept that night. I could see him from my window, pacing in his small workshop, his long shadow falling over the piles of wood shavings. I knew he was wrestling with a decision that held my life and the life of my child in his hands. Then, just as the first hint of dawn touched the sky, he came into my room. His face was haggard, but his eyes held a strange new resolve. He knelt by my bed and took my hand. "Elara," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I had a dream. In this dream," he told me, a brilliant light had appeared, telling him that the child I carried was a gift from the heavens, that we were to name him Jeshua. The dream was not just a comfort, but a chilling warning. "This child will change the world," the voice in the dream had whispered, "but the world will do everything in its power to extinguish him." His path will be lined with roses, but beneath every petal is a thorn. Kaelan looked deep into my eyes. I will not leave you, he said. I will not leave the boy. I will be his father. I promise you. And in that moment, I knew his acceptance wasn't just born of faith in a dream. It was born of a boundless, radical love for me. His promise to protect this child from that second forward became his sacred burden, an oath heavier than stone. He had chosen love over the law, our safety over his own honor. It was the first act of courage in a long, painful line of them that would come to define my son's life. Not long after, a decree came from Rome, a census. Every man had to return to his ancestral home to be registered. For Kaelan and me, it meant a long, arduous journey to Bethlehem, even as my pregnancy was nearing its term. The journey exhausted us. When we finally arrived, Bethlehem was bursting at the seams. Every inn, every guest house was full. Every door we knocked on was met with a cold shake of the head. Finally, a weary innkeeper, seeing my condition, took pity on us. He had no rooms, but he offered us his stable. And so it was there, surrounded by the quiet shuffling of sheep and donkeys, in the biting cold of a winter's night, that my son Jeshua was born. No midwife, no soft bed. Just me, Kaelan, and the gentle rhythm of a tiny new life breathing in the world. As Kaelan placed him in my arms, I looked into his clear, ancient eyes and wondered, how could a life so small, so fragile, be destined for something so great? How could he change the world when the world hadn't even offered him a proper roof for his birth? We didn't know that far away. The stars in the heavens had shifted, and in his palace, Governor Valerius was also watching the sky, his heart filled with suspicion. My son's birth wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of the storm. That storm broke upon us sooner than we could have ever imagined. A few weeks after Jeshua's birth, strange visitors arrived at the inn. They were not locals. They were stately, learned men from the Far East, men the people called stargazers. Their robes were of fine silk, and their camels were laden with precious cargo. They said a new star, one of unparalleled brilliance, had guided them on their long journey, a star that signified the birth of a great king. They had not gone to Governor Valerius in Jerusalem. The star had led them directly to Bethlehem. When they found us in the stable, they showed no surprise, no disdain. Instead, these noble men knelt on the dirt floor before my infant son, a baby lying in a feeding trough, and they presented him with the gifts of royalty, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Kaelan and I could only watch, a mixture of awe and terror gripping our hearts. The prophecy of Kaelan's dream was unfolding before our very eyes. But there was a shadow in their entourage. One of the servants traveling with the stargazers was, in fact, a spy for Valerius. He saw everything: the location, the child, the adoration. As soon as the wise men departed, he spurred his horse toward Jerusalem, a messenger of doom. The news ignited Valerius's paranoia into a raging inferno. A new king, born in a filthy stable, worshipped by foreign dignitaries. To him, this wasn't a prophecy. It was a declaration of war. He issued a secret, savage decree. His soldiers were to scour Bethlehem and its surrounding villages and slaughter every male child aged 2 and under. No exceptions. He would rip this threat out by its roots. That night, as the stargazers were warned in a dream to return home by another route, Kaelan too had his recurring vision. The familiar voice returned, urgent and sharp. "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Valerius is sending soldiers to kill him. Stay there until I tell you it is safe." Kaelan awoke in a cold sweat. Without a moment's hesitation, he woke me. Our flight began in the dead of night. It wasn't a journey, it was a desperate, breathless chase. We didn't dare travel the main roads, sticking instead to lonely, forgotten paths. By day, we hid in caves or thickets. Only under the cover of darkness did we move. Every distant sound of hooves, every flicker of a torch in the distance, sent a spike of pure fear through our hearts. We had to become ghosts. Kaelan shaved his beard. I smeared my tool with dirt to mask the pallor of exhaustion and fear. Along the way, we met other families also fleeing. Word of the massacre had begun to spread. One night, we found shelter in a deserted village. A woman sat huddled by a dead fire, her eyes empty. She told us her story. Valerius's soldiers had stormed her home. She had tried to hide her infant son under the floorboards, but he had cried out. They had dragged him out, right in front of her. She recounted the horror with a terrifying calm, as if her grief had gone beyond the realm of tears. Her story carved a permanent scar on my soul. I clutched Jeshua tighter, feeling the fragile beat of his heart, and I understood for the first time the true cost of the life I held in my arms. Our years in Egypt were a blur of hiding and homesickness. We lived in a poor immigrant quarter where Kaelan took any odd job he could find. Jeshua grew, taking his first steps, speaking his first words, a normal boy in every outward way. But the weight of our secret was a constant presence. We were fugitives in a foreign land, guardians of a nation's hidden hope. Years passed. Jeshua was a young boy now. Then finally word reached us of Valerius's death. Once again, Kaelan was visited in a dream. The one who sought the child's life is dead. It is time to go home. We packed our few belongings, our hearts a mix of joy and trepidation. We returned, but not to Bethlehem. That place held too many ghosts. We decided to go back to Nazareth, the quiet little village where it had all begun, hoping to finally give Jeshua a normal life. But Kaelan and I both knew deep down that normal was a luxury my son would never have. The storm had passed, for now, but on the horizon new clouds were already gathering. The years in Nazareth were the most peaceful of his short life. Jeshua grew up in Kaelan's workshop. The scent of pine and cedar, the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of the hammer and chisel, these were the sounds and smells of his boyhood. Kaelan taught him how to read the grain of a piece of wood, how to use simple tools to create things of use and beauty. He didn't just teach him a trade, he taught him patience, the art of turning something rough into something whole. He was a magnificent father. Not once, not for a single moment, did he ever treat Jeshua as anything less than his own flesh and blood. His love for the boy was real, as solid and dependable as the oak trees on the mountainside. But even in that peace, I saw the signs. There was a wisdom in my son that was far beyond his years. Elders from the village would sometimes seek him out, asking his opinion on complex disputes, and he would offer answers of such stunning simplicity and depth that they would leave shaking their heads in wonder. His compassion was boundless. He would give his own meager lunch to a beggar or sit for hours with an injured animal. The way he looked at the world was different. It was as if he could see past the outer shells people built around themselves, right into the hidden joy and pain in every heart. Then, when Jeshua was a young man, the rumors started. They drifted up from the south, whispers of a strange man living in the Judean wilderness, a man clothed in camel's hair who ate locusts and wild honey. They called him Zane, the voice in the wild. He wasn't a polished preacher from the synagogues. He was a gaunt, fiery social activist. His words were like sharpened knives, cutting through the self-satisfaction of the rich and the hypocrisy of the clergy. He called for a revolution of the soul, a return to core values, a stand against the corruption of both the Roman occupiers and the religious elite he called the Order of the Scroll. Thousands were flocking to the River Jordan to hear him speak and to be baptized as a symbol of their renewal. When these rumors reached Jeshua, I saw a change in his eyes, a restlessness, an urgency. It was as if Zane's call had awakened something that had been dormant within him. One morning he came to Kaelan and me. "I have to go," he said simply. "I have to see him." My heart clenched. I knew this day would come, but I was not ready. Kaelan placed a hand on his shoulder. his eyes full of a deep, odd understanding. "Go, my son," he said. "Do what you must do." Jeshua journeyed south. Weeks later, the stories found their way back to us. My son had gone to Zane at the river. When Zane saw him, he had stopped. They said that Zane, who bowed to no man, had said, "It is I who need to be cleansed by you. Why do you come to me?" But Jeshua had insisted. And as Jeshua rose from the water, they said the sky seemed to brighten in a peculiar way, that a soft halo of light had briefly enveloped him. Some swore they heard a whisper on the wind, a divine affirmation. After that, Jeshua did not come home. He disappeared. He walked straight into the vast, empty desert, a place of sand, rock, and scorching sun. He stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights, alone. He would later tell us only a fraction of what happened there. It wasn't just a battle against hunger and thirst. It was a crucible of the soul. In the deafening silence of the desert, he faced the ultimate temptations of being human. The voices of doubt, of power, of the easy way out, echoed in his mind. "You have power. Turn these stones to bread. End your suffering. You can command angels. Throw yourself from the highest peak. You will not be harmed. Show the world your greatness." And the final, greatest temptation: look at the kingdoms of the world, drowning in injustice. You can overthrow them. Use your power to forge an empire of righteousness by force. All you have to do is bow to worldly power, and it will all be yours. He overcame them all, not with a flash of divine might, but by clinging to his humanity, to the lessons of humility Kaelan had taught him. He chose the harder path, not the path of changing the world with a sword, but the path of changing it one human heart at a time. When he returned from the desert, he was a different man. He was still my Jeshua, but his eyes now held both a clear purpose and a profound sadness. He knew the path he had to walk, and he knew where it would lead. Jeshua didn't begin his mission in the grand synagogues or the palaces of the elite. He started in the dirtiest, most forgotten corners of society. His first stop was the slums, the alleys where the despised tax collectors and the shunned women of the night eked out a living. His first sermon wasn't a polished speech. It was a raw, emotional talk on a windy hillside to a crowd of people society considered human refuse. I was there watching from a distance. I saw the faces etched with suffering, the eyes devoid of hope, leapers forced to stand apart, beggars in rags, widows with no one. Then Jeshua began to speak. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the wind. He didn't speak of complex laws or the fires of hell. He spoke of paradoxes. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he said, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The beggars looked up. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." The widows began to listen. "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you because of righteousness, for your reward in heaven is great." Each word was like a balm on a bleeding soul. He wasn't just preaching, he was giving back dignity to those from whom it had been stripped. He told them they were the salt of the earth, the light of the world. He looked at the tax collectors and spoke of mercy. He looked at the scorned women and spoke of forgiveness. It wasn't a sermon, it was a manifesto, the manifesto of the broken. For the first time in their lives, these invisible people felt seen. From that crowd, Jeshua began to call his first companions. They weren't scholars or wealthy patrons. The first was Rorik, a fisherman, as rough and hot-tempered as the sea itself, but fiercely loyal. His face was leathered by the sun, his hands a mass of calluses from hauling nets. Jeshua simply said to him, "Follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men." And Rorik, without a single question, left his nets, his boat, his entire life, and followed him. And then, among the followers, there was a young man named Silas. Silas was different. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and his eyes burned with a zealous fire. Before meeting Jeshua, Silas had been part of a small rebel cell, men who believed that only violence could overthrow the Roman occupation. His group had been crushed, but the revolutionary flame in his heart had never died. Silas saw in Jeshua a potential that others missed. He didn't just hear the words of love. He saw the miracles. He saw the incredible leadership. He saw a man who could command the devotion of thousands with a few words. To Silas, Jeshua wasn't a spiritual guru. He was the perfect revolutionary general, the warrior king the nation had been waiting for. He followed Jeshua not just out of faith, but out of a secret, burning hope that Jeshua would be the one to lead the armed uprising that would free their people. I watched the way Silas looked at my son. It was a look of adoration, but also of expectation. A great and dangerous expectation. The conflict was already beginning to seed, not from his enemies, but from within the circle of those who loved him most. A loyal friend like Rorik, and a believer with a secret agenda like Silas. Both loved Jeshua, but they loved two entirely different versions of him, and I was afraid that one day that difference would tear them all apart. Jeshua's teachings began to spread, but words, no matter how powerful, are wind without action. And Jeshua acted. The miracles began not as a performance, but as a confirmation of everything he had said. The small ripples of change were coalescing, forming a tidal wave that was about to crash ashore. Each miracle was more than a healing. It was a political statement, a direct challenge to the existing order. When he healed a leper, he didn't just mend the man's skin. He touched him, an act forbidden by the laws of the Order of the Scroll. He was shattering the barrier of ritual purity, declaring that no human being was untouchable. The priests began to whisper among themselves. When he sat down to eat in the home of Malachi, a tax collector despised by the entire village, he wasn't just sharing a meal. He was demolishing the deepest social wall. "It is not the healthy who need a doctor," he told his critics, "but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." This statement was both a beacon of hope to the outcast and a slap in the face to the self-righteous. The most dramatic and, to those who witnessed it, terrifying miracle happened on the Sea of Galilee. A violent squall erupted, the waves rising like small buildings, threatening to swallow their flimsy fishing boat. While seasoned fishermen like Rorik were panicking, Jeshua simply stood and spoke to the storm. "Peace, be still." And the sea, in an instant, became as calm as glass. The disciples, Rorik included, were terrified. "What kind of man is this," they whispered to each other, "that even the winds and the waves obey him?" For Silas, this miracle was the final confirmation. A man who could command the forces of nature could surely command an army. A man who could order the waves to be still could surely break the Roman legions. Silas's belief in Jeshua as a military liberator became absolute. He began to meet in secret with like-minded men, former members of other failed rebellions, seeding the idea of a coming uprising, led by one who was more than a king. Jeshua had become a dual threat, a waking nightmare for the two powers that ruled the land. The new Roman governor Pontius Pilate, a pragmatic and ruthless man, feared a political uprising that could cost him his position. And the Order of the Scroll, led by the high priest Caiaphas, a shrewd politician in clerical robes, feared Jeshua would usurp their religious authority and their hold on the people. These two forces, who despised each other, began to realize they had a common enemy. In the dark corridors of the temple and the cold offices of the Roman administration, an unholy alliance began to form. They found a single unifying purpose. Jeshua had to be eliminated. The wave was becoming too large to stop. The only option was to break it as it hit the shore, and that shore was Jerusalem. The tension reached its breaking point during the Passover week, when hundreds of thousands of Jews from all over the world flooded into Jerusalem. The city was a powder keg of religious fervor and political resentment, waiting for a spark. Jeshua knew it. His disciples knew it. Rorik and the others were afraid. Silas was ecstatic. This was it. This was the stage for the revolution. Jeshua decided to enter Jerusalem, but the way he did it astonished everyone and planted the first seed of doubt in Silas's mind. He didn't ride a war horse like a conquering general. He didn't arrive in a gilded chariot like a king. He chose to ride on a young donkey, a symbol of peace and humility, fulfilling an ancient prophecy. As he entered the city, the crowds went wild. They had heard of the miracles. They had heard his teachings. They waved palm branches. They laid their cloaks on the road for the donkey to walk on. "Hosanna to the Son of David," they shouted. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The cheers echoed off the ancient city walls. For any other man, it would have been a moment of ultimate triumph. But I looked at my son's face, and I saw not joy, but an infinite sadness. He was weeping for the city, for the people who cheered him today and might be screaming for his crucifixion tomorrow. Silas, walking beside him, was a mixture of elation and confusion. He was thrilled by the public support, but baffled by Jeshua's humility. This wasn't how a revolutionary king made his entrance. "He's just being strategic," Silas told himself. "This is just the beginning." Jeshua didn't stop to bask in the adoration. He rode directly to the one place no one expected him to challenge: the heart of Jerusalem, the center of power for the Order of the Scroll, the temple. When he arrived in the temple courtyard, the scene was one of pious chaos. The sacred space for prayer had been turned into a noisy, sprawling marketplace. Money changers were gouging pilgrims on the exchange rates. Merchants were selling doves and sheep for sacrifice at exorbitant prices, cheating the poor. The air reeked of greed and deceit. A holy fury ignited in Jeshua, a fury I had never seen before. His gentle eyes blazed. He walked alone into the center of the chaos and began to overturn the tables of the money changers. Coins scattered across the stone floor with a clatter that silenced the entire courtyard. He fashioned a small whip from some discarded cords and used it to drive the animals and the merchants out. "Get out of here," he roared, his voice thundering in the cavernous space. "My father's house is a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." A stunned silence fell over the temple. Everyone, the crowds, the temple guards, the members of the order, was frozen in shock. This was an act of open public rebellion. This was no longer a subtle challenge. It was a direct assault on the authority of High Priest Caiaphas and his entire system. To Silas, this was the signal he had been waiting for. The revolution had begun. The hesitation was over. The teacher was finally making his move. He looked around, expecting the crowd to surge forward, to join Jeshua in taking the temple. But the people just stared, a mixture of awe and fear on their faces. The consequences were immediate. The Order of the Scroll convened an emergency council that very night. "We cannot let him live," Caiaphas declared. "It is better that one man dies than for the whole nation to be destroyed." They resolved to arrest Jeshua, but it had to be done in secret at night to avoid a riot. Their only problem was that Jeshua was always surrounded by crowds. They needed an insider, someone who could lead them to him at night when he was alone with his disciples. They needed a traitor. The atmosphere in the following days was electric with dread. We were staying in a small house in Bethany, just outside the city. Jeshua knew they were hunting him. He spent his time teaching the disciples, giving them his final lessons. The mood at the Last Supper we shared was heavy. No one spoke much. Jeshua looked sadly at each of them, his gaze lingering on Silas. "Truly, I tell you," he said, his voice low, "one of you who is sharing this meal with me will betray me." A wave of shock went through the room. "Is it I, Lord?" one after another asked. When it was Silas's turn, he too asked, his voice trembling, "Rabbi, is it I?" Jeshua just looked at him and said quietly, "You have said so." Silas's heart shattered. He knows everything. He fled from the table, stumbling out into the darkness. But he wasn't running out of guilt. He was running out of desperation. His plan was falling apart. Jeshua knew he was about to be arrested and had no intention of fighting back. The crowds would not rise on their own. He had to do something. He had to force Jeshua's hand. Silas ran to the high priest's palace. He didn't go for the 30 pieces of silver. That was just an insult, a cover for his real motive. He stood before Caiaphas and the elders. "I know where he will be," Silas said, his voice filled with a feverish certainty. "I will deliver him to you." The priests smiled, thinking they had bought a greedy man. But Silas continued, "But ready your soldiers. Be prepared for a fight. Because when you corner him, the Lion of Judah will roar. The thousands will rise up when they see their leader taken. He will liberate us whether he wants to or not." The priests exchanged uncertain glances, but they had no other choice. After the meal, Jeshua led us to a garden called Gethsemane to pray. The anguish on his face was palpable. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said. He went a short distance away by himself, fell to his knees, and prayed, "Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." When he came back, he found his disciples had fallen asleep from exhaustion. He woke them, and then, in the distance, we saw the flickering of torches and heard the clang of armor. A crowd of temple guards and Roman soldiers, led by Silas, was advancing into the garden. Rorik and the others grabbed their swords, but Jeshua stopped them. Silas stepped forward. He did not approach like a thief in the night. He looked directly into Jeshua's eyes, his own eyes glistening with tears in the torchlight. He walked up to my son, and in front of everyone, he placed a kiss on his cheek. It was not the kiss of a traitor. It was the kiss of a desperate believer. It was a signal to the guards, yes, but it was also a silent, screaming plea from the depths of his soul. "Please fight. Show them your power. Don't let them take you like this." Jeshua didn't resist. He didn't flinch. He just looked at Silas with an expression of immense pity and sorrow. "Silas," he said softly, his voice barely a breath, "do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" That sentence, that quiet, complete acceptance, was the final blow that pierced Silas's heart. In that one horrifying moment, he understood everything. Jeshua wasn't going to fight. There was no revolution. His plan, his hope, his entire understanding had been a catastrophic mistake. He wasn't the catalyst for an uprising. He was a pawn. He had murdered the very hope he worshipped. The guards surged forward and bound Jeshua. The disciples, in a panic, scattered and fled into the night. My son was left alone, surrounded by his enemies, ready to face the fate he had chosen. And Silas stood frozen in the darkness, watching him go, realizing he had just committed a crime from which there was no redemption. What followed was a nightmare of a trial, hurried and unjust. They dragged Jeshua to the house of the high priest, Caiaphas, where a sham court had been prearranged. They brought forth false witnesses, men paid to perjure themselves. He said he would destroy this temple and rebuild it in 3 days, one claimed. He called himself the Son of God, another shouted. Through it all, Jeshua remained silent. He offered no defense, no argument. His silence was more powerful than any speech, making his accusers look foolish. Caiaphas, enraged, tore his own robes and screamed, "Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. He is worthy of death." At dawn, they marched him to the Roman authorities, to Pontius Pilate, as only Rome held the power of capital punishment. Pilate, a shrewd politician, saw immediately that this was a political trap, an internal purge by the Jewish leaders. He questioned Jeshua in private. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked. Jeshua replied only, "You have said so." Pilate found no fault in him. He wanted to release him. But the crowd, incited by the order of the scroll, had gathered outside, baying for blood. Crucify him, they screamed. Pilate, in a final attempt to absolve himself of responsibility, offered the crowd a Passover custom, the release of one prisoner. "Who do you want me to release to you? Jeshua, who is called king, or Barabbas, a murderer and a rebel?" The crowd, without hesitation, roared back, "Barabbas!" Pilate washed his hands in front of them, a symbolic gesture of his powerlessness. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. But then, fearing a riot that would threaten his position, he handed Jeshua over to the soldiers. I was there in the crowd, sheltered by a few loyal women, my heart being crushed in my chest. I watched as they stripped him of his clothes and draped a scarlet robe over him in mockery. I watched as they twisted a crown of thorns and pressed it down onto his scalp, the sharp spikes digging into his flesh. They put a staff in his hand for a scepter, then knelt before him, spitting on him and jeering, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They made him carry his own cross, a heavy, splintered beam of wood, through the streets of Jerusalem toward a hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. He fell again and again under the weight of the cross and the savagery of the flogging. Blood and sweat mingled, running down his face. Meanwhile, Silas, realizing the horrific finality of his actions, had run like a madman back to the temple. He found the priests who had paid him. He threw the 30 pieces of silver onto the floor, the coins clattering with a cold, mournful sound. "I have sinned," he screamed, tears streaming down his face. "I have betrayed innocent blood." The priests just shrugged with contempt. "What is that to us? That's your problem." Utterly broken, realizing he had destroyed everything, Silas ran to a deserted place and took his own life. My son's closest friend, who had betrayed him for a false hope, died alone in despair. On Golgotha, they nailed him to the cross. I heard the sickening thud of the hammer, and each strike felt like a blow to my own heart. They raised the cross, positioning him between two common thieves. Below, the soldiers gambled for his clothes, while the crowd and the priests continued to taunt him. He saved others, but he can't save himself. If he is the king, let him come down from the cross, and we will believe. Jeshua, in his agony, remained a king of silence. He was not the military conqueror that everyone, even Silas, had wanted. His silence, his endurance, was his final act of rebellion, a revolution of love, not of the sword. He looked down and saw me, and he saw the one disciple who had been brave enough to stay with me. "Woman," he said, his voice raspy, "here is your son." Then to the disciple, "Here is your mother." Even in his final moments, he was taking care of me. His last words were not a curse on his enemies. As he struggled for breath, he looked to the heavens and whispered, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." It was his ultimate victory. He had conquered hatred with love, violence with forgiveness. And then he bowed his head and breathed his last. The sky darkened, a small earthquake shook the ground. The life of my son here on this earth was over. The next 2 days were the emptiest, most silent days of my life. The disciples, the men who had boasted they would die for their master, were now hiding behind locked doors, trembling with fear. Rorik, the strong one, was tormented by guilt, having denied even knowing Jeshua 3 times on the night he was arrested. Hope was dead. The dream was shattered. All that was left was grief and the bitter taste of failure. On the 3rd day, at dawn, I went with a few of the other women to the tomb where they had laid Jeshua's body. It was a tomb carved into a rock face, sealed with a massive stone. We walked in silence, each lost in her own sorrow, carrying spices to properly anoint his body. But when we arrived, we were met with an impossible sight. The great stone had been rolled away. The entrance to the tomb was open. We looked inside, our hearts pounding with a new kind of fear. It was empty. The linen cloths that had been wrapped around my son's body were still there, folded neatly, but his body was gone. Our first thought was panic. His enemies had come and stolen his body to desecrate it further. We ran, weeping, to tell the disciples. Rorik and another disciple ran to the tomb, saw it was as we had said, and then returned, confused and bewildered. I alone stayed behind, weeping outside the empty tomb. Then through my tears, I saw a figure standing nearby. I thought he was the gardener. "Woman," he asked gently, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" I sobbed, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." The man simply said my name, Elara. It was just one word, but it was a voice I could never forget. I turned and looked, really looked. It was him, Jeshua, my son. He was standing there, solid and real, not a ghost. He still had the marks of the nails in his hands and feet, but he was alive. He didn't appear in a blaze of glory or a blinding light. He just stood there, as peaceful as the morning. Joy and disbelief so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. All the pain, all the fear vanished. He was back. His promise was true. Love was stronger than death. In the days that followed, he appeared to his disciples, not to judge or condemn. As they huddled in their locked room, he simply walked through the door, stood among them, and said, "Peace be with you." He showed them his wounds so they would believe. A few days later, some of them, including Rorik, had gone back to their old lives, back to the Sea of Galilee. They fished all night and caught nothing. As dawn was breaking, they saw a man on the shore who called out, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" They said no. The man told them, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." They did, and this time the net was so full they couldn't haul it in. At that moment, the disciple whom Jeshua loved recognized him and said to Rorik, "It is the Lord." Rorik, without a second thought, threw himself into the water and swam to shore. When they got to the beach, they saw a simple, heart-warming sight. Jeshua had a charcoal fire going, and he was cooking fish and bread for them, just as he had done so many times before. He didn't talk about their failure or their fear. He didn't reprimand Rorik for his denial or speak of Silas's tragic betrayal. He just said, "Come and have breakfast." He sat with them, broke the bread, and gave it to them. And in the quiet of that sunrise on the beach, the disciples finally understood. The kingdom Jeshua spoke of wasn't a territory to be won with swords. It was a community built on forgiveness. His sacrifice wasn't a failure. It was the seed of a new world. His greatest power wasn't calming storms or multiplying loaves, but healing broken hearts and forgiving unforgivable failures. Their restoration began not with a command, but with a simple meal by a fire. Silas thought the world needed a king to set it free. Pilate and Caiaphas feared a rebel would tear it down, but my son never wanted to be either of those things. He just wanted the world to know that even in the deepest darkness, a single candle of kindness can light a flame of hope, that forgiveness is stronger than any sword, and that love, true love, never really dies. His story didn't end on that hill. It didn't end at the empty tomb. That is simply where it truly began. It began in the forgiven hearts of his friends. It began in me, and I hope tonight it has begun something in you too. Thank you for listening to my story, our story. If it has touched you in any way, I would ask you to consider subscribing to our channel. This isn't just a channel, it's a place where we can share the stories that change us, the stories that remind us of the power of love and sacrifice. Become a part of this community. I wish you a night of peace